Getting started with full system acceptance tests using Selenium.
You are programming with Palermo. You deliver software. You need to move fast, deliver quality, and run your software with confidence. Stay tuned for timeless solutions, simple methods, and topics that will propel you forward. And now your host, lifelong programmer, author, teacher, coach, Christian, and charismatic speaker, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome back to Programming with Palermo. I am your host, Jeffrey Palermo. Today, we're going to take a dive into using Selenium for full system testing and acceptance testing. Sometimes those two words get interchanged. I've used them both, but this is a important type of test for pretty much any application. You have in test-driven development, you have different layers of testing. Just like in Onion architecture, you have different layers of code. You have the inner code, and then you layer on additional code to the outside as you get closer to interfaces. The same thing in testing. You have unit tests, which test your core, and every method of every class should have a unit test that doesn't depend on interfaces, doesn't depend on external dependencies. And then you have integration tests that make sure that every one of these interfaces does work to the outside world, whether it be a database, a web service, yada, yada, a queue. And you make sure that your application knows how to call those interfaces. Those are integration tests. Unit tests don't call outside of its own memory space, its own process. Integration tests do call from your application's process to some other process. Again, the simplest form is just your code calling a database, which a database runs as a different process on a different server. And then there's full system tests. Full system tests take all of the pieces of the application and the dependencies that you interface with, runs the complete application, and executes a particular feature, a particular function. And so today we're going to take that style. We're going to add on to an example that we've been using, and we're going to add a Selenium test, and we're going to talk about the ins and outs of full system acceptance testing using Selenium. Selenium is just a tool. What's important is that you know how to create these full system tests that actually run an application just like they're intended to be run in production, where users pull up a screen, they type in some things, they hit some buttons, different things happen. Whatever the method of using the application is, you need full system tests that cover everything that is to be supported. So screens used by users, we got to pop up the screens and actually touch them. If it's data coming from place A to place B in your system, well, we have to design a full system test that actually runs that to make sure that it works. And we're not going to go super deep today. This is going to be super quick, drinking from the fire hose. But after this, you are going to be able to add Selenium to your particular application and start creating full system tests for either technical type tests or acceptance tests that are more user scenario based. So let's get into it. Okay, the code for this is inside github.com/Jeffrey Palermo in the Onion Architecture .NET 6 project. And there's a lot of goodness in this project, and it was built up with a multi-part series on how to put all the critical pieces of Onion architecture together for .NET 6. But we are going to add here just the bare minimum of getting full system tests going using Selenium. You can use them for acceptance tests. You can use them for just functional full system tests. But we're gonna go in, and we can see a branch here, 7- full system acceptance testing using Selenium. So you can check out that branch, even as there's a lot of other changes in this repository. But we're going to do that. So we have our Visual Studio solution here, and I'm not going to go over the structure, but let me just run the application just so you can see it is the bare minimum Blazor WebAssembly project. It is running command line here. I do have a few health checks that happened at the beginning, and I'm not going to go over the application that we've been using in multiple other Programming with Palermo episodes. You can go back from that. We can fetch data. We fetch church bulletin data, the basics of it. And in our counter controller, this is the one button here. And we're actually going to write a full system test to make sure that this button works. And of course, every button on your application, you're going to click the button. It's going to go to databases and web services and all kinds of things. But at the root, we need to do some setup. We need to navigate to this page, and we need to select something to click on. In other cases, we would put in information into text boxes and drop downs. But this just has a button. So let's do that. Let's blaze through this and tell you everything that you need to know. First of all, you need a project for the tests. Now, I tend to call them acceptance tests because that's a very common use for these full system tests. But we already have our unit tests. We already have our integration tests. We're adding another in-unit project for acceptance tests. And of course, that just looks like add new project. You're going to go in here and literally find in-unit test project. And there we go. Okay, I've already added it. And so let me back out of here. But let me show you this project. Now, I've gone to NuGet and I've added a few packages. The in-unit stuff comes automatically with the project template to wire up just the ability to run tests, and the coverlet collector for code coverage. And by the way, if you'd like to look at how the build looks for code coverage, I don't know. This is just the beginnings of this test project for the unit test and integration tests. We do have those command lines right in here. Coverlet output, cobertura, all the command line and the command line switches that you need in order to enable code coverage. Those examples are in the private build script in this project, so you can grab that too. Okay, so we're looking at the acceptance test project, and I've added a few NuGet packages. I've added shouldly, which that's a good assertion library that we use in our unit test and our integration test. And I've also added Selenium WebDriver and Selenium Chrome driver, WebDriver.Chrome driver. So if I just show you all the Selenium-based packages that there are to choose from, I mean, there's a whole lot. There's the Chrome. There's support for Chrome, support for Firefox, support for Edge. There's a lot there, but I'm going to keep it simple. And we've added those, and then we've had the acceptance test project reference our core project and reference integration tests. Now, for the future, you tend to need some of the helper and the test stubs and the test setups that you create in your integration tests project, because that is the test project that tests to make sure that the dependencies of the application, that the communication to and from them works properly. And so you end up creating helpers. And you set up test data in the database before you run tests, things like that. The core project has all of the code and all of the entities and everything. You tend to, of course, need that. But we're not going to go into that today, but you always need them, so we add them. All right, so now let's look at our first test. We're going to go into this project, and of course we have one test here. Now, in the usings, this comes for free from the test project. You can kind of add that as you want, global usings. I tend to put a folder structure in place that makes sense. Until you know what makes sense, a good convention is to put a folder in place for testing a particular URL area or URL path, because you may have multiple test fixtures for a particular page, and that's totally fine. By convention, we end our test fixtures with the word tester, just like unit test and just like integration test. It's noun tester. So this is the counter increments tester, or making sure that the counter does in fact increment. And before I dive into the code, I'm just going to show you what it does. And I already have my application running. I know that. Good. And now I'm going to run this. I like keyboard shortcuts, so Control-TR. That's the ReSharper runner. I tend to love the ReSharper runner, although you can use Visual Studio. Works just fine. And okay, we're done. Our test passed. That was kind of fast, wasn't it? Let's see if we can make it slow down. So if we go here and just say thread.sleep for 5 seconds. And let's run this test again. Okay, just so we can see it. All right, it navigates, and it just clicked on the button. We're sleeping for 5 seconds, and then we're going to check that the current count did in fact increment to 1, and it passed. Okay, so let's get rid of that thread.sleep out of here. All right. Now, let's go through what this thing is doing. What is this thing doing? So, first of all, we have a few sections. Arrange, and then act, and assert. Just like test-driven development. And you have those sections. Now, arranging, we don't have any data in the database, so we don't have to actually insert records into a database so that we know what's there. We kind of know that the current count is going to start at 0. All right, but we need the host address, which we're later on in a different episode we'll refactor this out into environmental keys that can be poked in environment variables, so we can run it on a build server and from a build script. And then we're going to use our driver our Chrome driver. We can use Edge driver, whatever we're using. We're going to navigate, and we're going to go to a particular URL, and the host address is going to be the local host and then /counter, because that's the URL. And then we're going to actually have to tell the Chrome driver to wait just a little bit. I gave it a timeout of 5 seconds, but we're going to wait until a particular element is present. And that particular element is time span. Let's just find element, axpath per button. Okay. All right. I just wanted to highlight those so you can see the traceability. We're going to wait until we can actually see that button because we don't know how long a web page is going to take to paint and completely fill the screen. The screen may come up, but it may still, with all the JavaScript that's going on and Blazor moving elements around in the DOM, we don't want to use a thread.sleep. We want to instead sit there and just wait until a particular element is present in the DOM, and that's what we do there. Okay, so let's pause and talk about the driver for a second. If I show you what that driver is, it's up top here, iWebDriver. We are actually saving it off here, and we're using a test driver class. This is a helper that I have used, regardless of what you call it. You're going to have a helper for the driver, and you just always have a helper class. Every Selenium project I've done, going back to when the first time, 2006 maybe with .NET. Selenium's an old library. Okay, so I went into here, and test driver is over here inside of acceptance tests. And we're using the Chrome WebDriver. By the way, the NuGet package gives you everything that you need. It gives you the exe that's behind there. And we have the creation of the driver and then dispose. And because we don't want to cause a browser window to pop up and then have no mechanism to actually close the browser window. So we do that. All right. So in a general environment, we're going to be getting some keys like the URLs and whatnot from iConfiguration. So I always have that in there. I hard-coded it now because it's the simplest example, but you're going to have this in here. And for a build server versus local, an environment variable is your friend. So on a build server, the path to Chrome driver is just a little bit different from the path when you actually run it inside Visual Studio. So just know that that's what's for. It always tends to be that way. Azure Pipelines, GitHub Actions, just is that way. We tend sometimes to use some Chrome options and sometimes not, but just so you know that that's there. And then we create the Chrome driver and we set an implicit timeout to 10 seconds. In other words, if I can't do something within 10 seconds, just tell it to throw an exception and we'll end that test. Okay, we're not going to just sit around and wait. Also, there is a helper method here called take screenshot, and it comes in with a step number, the test name, and then the step name, because we're going to create PNG files, image files that are ordered by the test and then the step number and then whatever we're doing. Okay, and we're going to save an actual picture of the screen, how it looks in that state, and put it in our test attachments, which every product out there that runs tests keeps test attachments where you can easily see them.
Programming with Palermo is brought to you by ClearMeasure, a software architecture company that empowers .NET teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their software with confidence in Azure. If your team has a project that's too important to be delayed or derailed, ClearMeasure can help while keeping your team in the driver's seat and growing in capability. Click on clearmeasure.com for more information. If you are an architect or .NET engineer aspiring to become an architect, check out clearmeasure.com/careers. Now, back to the show.
Azure Pipelines, does a great job of that. Every build server does a great job of it. But we're going to get the screenshot. We're going to save it as the file name, and then we tell InUnit to add the test attachment, giving it the path. Okay, so that's what it means when we call take screenshot, which you'll see the first one is right here. Okay, but we actually have several. Let me go back. We actually have several places where we call take screenshot. All right, so now we have our driver created, and we're going to make sure that initially it shows 0, and this is current count 0. So if you've never become familiar with CSS selectors, this is an example of a CSS selector. This is what you're going to start with, but this is bad. This is not what you're going to end with. So let's go over here. How do we find the CSS selector for this guy? Well, we can inspect, hit the F12 developer tools, and we can see that current count is 0. Well, you can't just get a CSS selector for a particular piece of text. You can get a piece of XPath, and if you've never seen what XPath looks like, this is what XPath looks like. /div, /main, /article, /p. It just trace back text, the second element of text. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up here and go up to the wrapping element. We're going to copy the CSS selector right there, and this is what that looks like. It just traces the elements down there to the p tag. So let's go back over to Visual Studio, and that's what we have here, and it does a good job of finding it. Okay, and then we're going to assert that it contains the character 0 because we want it to contain the character 0. If not, something weird happened. Now we're gonna go through our act step, and we are going to actually click the button. We're going to have the robot inside Chrome driver click the button for us as if we were clicking it with a mouse. Then we're going to take another screenshot. And by the way, when you do step numbers, I tend not to do 1, 2, 3, because when you come back and refactor these tests, which tend to have multiple steps, you always end up inserting a step. And it's just easier if you can just add, step number 15, instead of having to renumber all the other files. That's an old programmer trick that goes way back to numbered line items in source code files. But what we do here, we take the screenshot. Okay, so now we've clicked it, and we're not refreshing the page. So in this case, we know that we don't have to use a WebDriver wait because it's going to be instantaneous. But we're going to look at the current count element that we already have, and we're going to make sure that the text contains the character 1 instead. Okay? So, and then we're going to take our screenshot again. All right, so again, with that knowledge, let's run it. And it's going to be really fast. Finds it, and test succeeds now. Okay. All right, just to prove that this is actually doing what you expect it to do, let's go to our client project. Let's go to counter, and let's just do 2. Okay, and let's run this again. All right, and just so you can see, now it's counting by 2s. All right, so that is not what we expected to do. Let's come back. Let's run the test. Test runs pretty quick. Pops up, clicks the button, and it finishes. Okay, and expected 1, but was that, or expected to contain 1, but the text was actually this. Okay, so our test is calibrated. You want to see the test fail. Red, green refactor is the mantra for tester in development. You want to see the test fail because it properly calibrates the test, and you have confidence that you're testing the right thing. So if I put it back, and we're going to run the test again. All right, and that went fine. Okay, now let's not leave it here. Let's do one more thing. So we have the X path for the button that we've saved off, and we're using that button. We're using that here to find the X path. Now, this does in fact find that button. But what if we rearrange the markup of the screen, or what if we decompose the Blazor screen into multiple different components, which we know we're going to do? This is brittle. This does not work for Selenium tests long term. Your Selenium tests are going to break. You won't know why. And then you're going to complain that maintaining these tests just takes so much effort. And it does if you poorly design your selectors. So let's go ahead and just make this particular one better. All right, so let's look at the actual application, and let's hit F12. Let's look at the markup on the counter. We can right click, we can inspect. It'll jump us right here, and we need to figure out how to actually use this. So we can do some testing. We can copy the selector. We can go to the command line right here, and we can actually use some helpers and put in the selector inside quotes, and we can see, that did find the element that we were looking for. Great, and we can inspect it. All right, what else could we do? Well, it's a button. Okay, what if there's other buttons on the screen? That's not going to work. But if we do button btn dash primary, well, that would also find it. This particular has two different classes, so we could actually make it really specific, and we could put btn, and that also finds it. We could also, if it has multiple classes, you can do comma button.btn, and it finds it again. But these are just CSS classes. What if we decide that we want the button to look a little different? You have somebody else that's just refreshing the look of the application screen. We're tied to styling, which is how it looks. So if we change the way it looks, or we change the conventions, or if we change from Twitter Bootstrap to the material CSS, or any of the ones that are going to come in the future, it's going to break our tests. That's not cool. What would be better is to have something totally specific. And one way to do it is by creating specific test-specific CSS tags, like let's say click me button, and that works too. Okay, where you can create a CSS spreadsheet with no visual elements but just class names, but then you have to take care that you don't have any accidental collisions. Another way that you can do it is by putting another attribute on here. So ref equals click me button, and close that up. Actually, I need to manage my quotes. I'm gonna alternate quotes. All right, that didn't work. But check this out. You have a button, and it's a tag totally unrelated to anything else. And you can add tags. You can use the data dash tags. You can use a tag in your application that is not going to have a conflict. But let's just check that out and see how we would do it. Okay, so click me button. Well, let's go over to the counter controller, and what would that look like? Well, if we add an attribute, click me button, and we recompile, refresh. Let's look. Did that refresh us? Inspect. All right, click me button. So let's go here, and look at that. It found it. Okay, simple as that. And so let's roll with that because that's specific. This is not the only way, but the key here is you don't want to accidentally have your tests take a dependency on something not test related. Everything is an API. So adding a test specific tag to markups that need a handle, think of that as a test API, okay, an interface to your full system acceptance tests. You need to do this, okay? Don't just grab the markup that happens to work on a particular day, because that markup's going to change. The structure and arrangement of a page is going to change. The styling is going to change. And you don't want to invest in these types of tests and then just have them break and you not know why, and you have to essentially redevelop the test. Not cool. So you want to have a test-specific API, put in attributes that are used by nothing else except these types of tests. All right, so what it would look like if we just kind of adapt the test here. And for our XPath, tell you what we're going to do. We're going to take away this XPath and have it right here. We're going to do by dot. We can do multiple things. We can do by XPath, by CSS selector, by class name, multiple things like that. All right, CSS selector, and it's going to be a click me button. All right, so let's see if that actually works. So let's run our test. Okay, now I told you we need to calibrate our test, right? Every time we need to calibrate our test. So let's make sure that that is in fact working properly. Okay. On the test. Should fail because we changed the tag name so it doesn't know how to find the button. We have an implicit timeout. And it's looking for the button, and didn't find the button. Okay, but we just fix it. And there we go. Okay, so you'll want to do that to this as well, but I just wanted to show you kind of what it looks like. You want to create your interface of element finders that speak the language of the test that is not going to change. But that's really all it takes to get this type of test running. Now there's some build automation work that we need to do. We'll tackle that in a different episode. But as far as authoring these types of tests locally, these are the basic mechanics, and then more and more patterns layer on top of it. But make sure, just like every other good test, a test should be responsible for its own setup. Okay. Some people say, oh, a test should tear down after itself. Well, if a test goes sideways, if a test doesn't quite work the way it's supposed to, do you really depend on that test to properly tear itself down afterwards? No, you don't. So the important part is the test sets up for itself. If there needs to be some data in a database table, that test is responsible for getting it there. Not that, oh, it should be there and lots of tests are going to use it. Well, if lots of tests are going to use it, then just make a helper class that inserts data and have every test use that helper class in its setup. That's particularly fine. But every test should be responsible for its own setup. All right, remember that. Well, that was quick. That was fast. That was a lot of information that you just took in. But I hope you're excited to start creating full system acceptance tests using Selenium for your .NET applications. Remember, you need it for every application. And just a few rules of thumb, you're going to tend to have an order of magnitude more unit tests than you do integration tests, and then an order of magnitude more integration tests than full system tests. So if you have one full system test, then you're probably going to have 10 integration tests and 100 unit tests. And now when the application's brand new and young, you're not going to get those averages. But as the application matures and you've been using test-driven development over time, you tend to have the same number of lines of production code as the number of lines of total test code of all different types. You tend to have 10 times as many integration tests as full system tests, and then 10 times as many unit tests as integration tests. Some of the things just to look at as you go along. And if your experience doesn't line up to that, then kind of look at what you're doing and figure out why. You're not going to be spot on, but you shouldn't have more integration tests than unit tests, and you shouldn't have more full system tests than integration tests. Now, I'll give you one exception. If you really dispatch your full system testing framework to product management or user groups to create additional acceptance tests, then those groups will go to town and create scenario after scenario after scenario. Some of them will be duplicate, but in those areas where you adopt true acceptance testing and you're doing combinatorial testing of all types, you're going to have an acceptance testing test suite managed by product management that's just going to grow. But I'm talking about what typically happens in the engineering function. So I hope this helps. And I'm Jeffrey Palermo. Thank you for programming with Palermo. God bless you.
You've been watching Programming with Palermo, your primary place for highly productive programming protocols and practices. Remember, you have what it takes. You can do this. You are a programmer, formed by God Himself and called to this profession for a purpose. You can catch every episode at palermo.network as well as syndicated locations nationwide. We're so glad you tuned in. Until next time, may God bless you, and thanks for Programming with Palermo. Programming with Palermo has made a special arrangement with Marketplace Chaplains. Besides programming challenges, we all face issues in life where we need some help. If you'd like, you can call a chaplain confidentially. To speak with a gentleman, dial 512-923-8178. Or to speak with a lady, dial 512-619-6950. The show won't know you called, and everything is kept in strict secrecy. This is a free service, available if you or a friend need it.